The next presentation is the second part of our Sensors and Summerfruit project. We heard from Ian earlier on. And this part is presented by one of the lead researchers at RMIT University in Melbourne, Dr. Alex Gardi. And in particular, and I have to confess, I'm a physicist, I love this sort of stuff, and I was really keen that Alex could share some specifics with us in his own dedicated session. This one looks at the innovative use of LiDAR and drones in targeting an important orchard attributes, again with the aim of improving that export quality of Australian summer fruit. So as part of the broader project team, and on behalf of us all, Alex, welcome, and looking forward to hearing the presentation.
Thank you, David, and it's a pleasure and a fortune to have my presentation scheduled after Ian, who provided a fantastic overview and a great level of detail on the general project. So this is one of the particular stream of that project, and in particular the development of a bistatic LiDAR system for carbon dioxide sensing in summer fruit crops. I think I give this presentation on behalf of a nice team at RMIT University School of Engineering. We are all members of the Cyber Physical and Autonomous Systems group. So what do we do in our group? So, well, we've been looking at remote sensing, which is an important application for both the ground, air, and space vehicles and assets. And we focus, normally in our group, we take care of mostly aerial vehicles, so unmanned aerial vehicles in particular. So one of the applications of remote sensing is precision agriculture. And many years ago, we were looking at, around 2017, we were looking already at how to best use some of the drones to provide more effective and efficient support to precision agriculture. Now, this combined with some ideas we had for remote sensing of molecular concentrations using a new cost-effective and low size, weight, and power technique. And this was our eureka moment. So looking at what was done, here is an overview of the literature at that time, including all the direct and indirect methods and at what stage of the growth or sometimes the inoculation of pathogens things are relevant. Now, our real eureka moment came when we realized that carbon dioxide is strongly correlated with the detection of fruit maturity and the fruit potential plant diseases. Now, those studies underpinned our further developments because we realized that young peach fruits, for instance, responded to increased ambient temperature, CO2 concentration with decreasing net CO2 exchange rate, so decreasing photosynthesis in light, but more mature fruit did not respond in a similar way. So our idea was that spatiotemporal trends and anomalies in the concentration distribution of carbon dioxide around an orchard could be used to yield important information regarding fruit maturity. So there came our idea to develop a system, again, based on a low C swap. You may not be familiar with this acronym, which is quite common in aerospace, is cost, size, weight, and power. So a low cost, size, weight, and power variant of some differential absorption LiDAR, which is a measurement technique for detecting molecular concentration in particular, although it is possible to extend it also to aerosol concentrations. And again, develop a small size, weight, and power version that could be used around an orchard and would not cost unreasonably. In particular, we targeted the integration into a drone, so a UAS. Some people are familiar with this unmanned aerial system, ARCAV system acronym, to monitor fruit maturity and plant health efficiently. And this couldn't happen at a better time because in that moment we had a very active and fruitful engagement with Agriculture Victoria in particular, but also other partners. And we clearly laid out a path forward. Now, a characteristic of this system is that it relies on two components: a transmitter, typically on board the drone, and a receiver that can be on a tripod or on another drone. Now, they can be swapped, but to have this low size, weight, and power implementation, it is necessary to have those two components. It's not possible to have a single component. So what's the principle behind? Well, the differential absorption LiDAR principle essentially relies on the spectral absorption of laser, so electromagnetic energy across the propagation path due to the presence or absence of molecules, in particular CO2, which has certain absorption bands. So it is possible to measure both the on-absorption band and off-absorption, and doing so in proximity of the trees, allows to develop an accurate mapping of the concentrations of CO2, which has good resolution both spatially and temporally. So the particle retrieval approach is based on this algorithm presented here. So essentially, we identified the most promising wavelengths for on and off absorption. And to do this kind of, it's an kind of customized remote sensing, remote spectroscopy approach. And the important is that you negate some of the parasitic effect, like the atmospheric scattering and other propagation effects, which we do not want to measure. So we can focus on CO2 because we remove these effects in post-processing. This is the high-level principle. This is a zoom of the molecular absorption band for carbon dioxide in the near infrared spectrum. Is the most promising also because the technology is now mature in terms of the textures and energy sources, so laser sources. And the gas molecules have selective absorption on incident light based on molecular vibration bands. So this phenomena of absorption are associated to molecular vibrations. This in particular is a nice peak, 1572, and the 1575 is associated with minimum absorption. And there is a little interference by other molecules like water vapor and others. So by selecting the appropriate combination of hardware and software and starting to develop our custom software, it was possible to design a system which you see here. This is the transmitter enclosure already integrated with multiple components, which could be class 1 laser. So another requirement for this development was to be able to have a safe system that could be used without evacuating the field. So could be used in presence of other people and animals without potential health hazards. So the temperature and current control of the laser allows to tune it finely. Of course, we don't need the full spectrum, but the characterization allowed us to pick the most stable working conditions. And we went further to do some laboratory characterization of the optical resolution achievable. That was important because we want to ensure that we achieve a very good molecular resolution. In particular, we are looking at sub ppm, so below 1 part per million. And as you can see, with any path length beyond 1 meter, and definitely this is where we are aiming at, because we are looking at using the laser across the orchard, so from 1 meter to 20 and so on, the part per million resolution is actually achieving the required objective. Okay. Now, we had to also develop the full enclosure and the assembly of components, mainly considering that this system will have to stay, especially during this project, the Food Agility CRC funded project, on the field for a long period of time, so collecting data in absence of further arrangements to protect it from weather and other factors like dust. So we had to design an enclosure that was safe and protected the system from all the conditions, and this was achieved. And in doing so, we also integrated the low size, weight, and power components with already the size sufficient to be integrated on a drone. An example is provided here, but there are many agricultural drones we can consider. The DJI Matrix is one of them. So the receiver has a similar size, although the power is typically supplied by the network, so no need to have a custom, although it is possible to power it with a drone battery as well, similarly to the transmitter. And the size and the enclosure are very similar to the transmitter. In fact, the only way to easily discern one from the other is the absence of the laser class 1 sign. And we use IoT components, so it is possible to actually broadcast the results to a remote cloud or server, which can hold the data until processed and actually support the remote processing. This is the design of our control board. We evaluated a few from the market, so off-the-shelf components, but we realized that none of them actually met our expectation, our requirements in terms of miniaturizations, but also stability of the wavelength. So we came up with our design, which is custom made at our MIT University. And this has been like revision, I think 5, you can see here. So there have been a few iterations in the design. So what about the data? So of course, the system produces point measurements. These need to be processed, and an extrapolation need to take place to ensure that we have a full mapping, which is spatio-temporal in nature. So we need to monitor concentrations across the fields at different times, in different weather conditions, likely, removing the effects, the parasitic effect due to the different environmental conditions, and again, with a fine spatial resolution. How is it possible? Well, this is all the role of the job of data processing and AI-based analysis. The next step was to look into a service model, because it is important to look at, this is a low TRL technology, admittedly, but we are already looking at its successful exploitation in a future commercial pathway. And to do so, it is important to consider what would be a viable service model. So what is our service model? Well, for medium and small growers, possibly it could be a subscription service where you can book the monitoring that will take place at certain dates, regular intervals, and inputs from the grower will ensure that we capture the specificities of the field and a particular crop, and the location and cultivar information. On arrival, a human remote pilot will take care of considering the physical and meteorological conditions to ensure that safe operation of the drone, confirm the app monitoring conditions are suitable, and unbox and prepare the system for operation. All the further steps will ensure an efficient monitoring of the field, which will rely minimally on the human pilot. In fact, the pattern is predefined. And once the pattern, an individual monitoring will yield certainly a distribution, a mapping of the photosynthesis as occurring on the field, but the maximum benefit will be achieved by multiple subsequent observations. The US operation sequence is also detailed here. So again, we use IoT technology, so all the system components interact in real time, and it is quite easy to control everything and adjust as necessary the conditions. The pattern was also selected to carry out the most efficient monitoring of fields of generic size and shape. The system will be tested in the Tatura smart farm, which has a sundial shaped orchard with the island in different directions. However, the system is designed to actually be applied to the typical rectangular or square shapes of the orchard. This will lead to, as I said, as a heat map kind of style of mapping in a single monitoring session, which can be repeated in multiple sessions to achieve to determine the temporal patterns. The app also is being considered for both the remote pilot and the grower. So looking at what can be shared and in a way that is efficient for the human-machine interface. Again, those are just concepts, but we are already considering a few functions here that will support the future interface design. And in conclusion, we were able to actually apply our concept to our practical UAV bistatic LiDAR system with potential for high accuracy measurement of localized carbon dioxide, so photosynthesis-based correlations. We are already working on machine learning algorithms to interpret the fluctuations correlated to photosynthetic rate, indication of plant stressor and fruit development across the growth season. And the system is being fine-tuned at the moment through lab characterization while we wait for a field installation in terms of both wavelength selection and tuning stability, the limiting the timing of the various measurements, and the gimbal control of the transmitter. Finally, we are also optimizing the UAV monitoring pattern to, again, make sure that they are the best possible solution for efficient monitoring. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. You've given away the cat out of the bag already in terms of the your eureka moment in associating CO2 with maturity. Can you give us an insight into the sorts of sensitivities you're targeting here? I mean, the system's obviously up for it, but what are we talking about? Parts per million, parts per billion? What sort of path lengths?
Parts per million can be achieved, and we actually demonstrated already. In fact, less than 0.3 parts per million will be achieved in a practical implementation. The actual question would be the spatial temporal resolution. Now, the temporal resolution will be limited by the number of patterns that will be carried out across the field across the week, during the week, throughout the week. The spatial resolution will be probably in the order of 1 meter or barely less than that. We would like to achieve a higher one if possible, but we are still operating above the canopy. So of course, this will mostly give us information about the individual trees, but it will be a bit more difficult to discern what part of the tree has more mature fruit, if that is of interest. So in that, we see the ideal complementarity of this system with other systems that are already being developed and tested throughout the FA042 project, so the Summerfruit project.
Yeah. So you're talking about, so when you talk about that spatial resolution of 1 meter, you've got the time of flight resolution, you know, from a single point to a single point, where in the return signal do you get the absorption, hence along the line there, but you've also got the spatial interpolation of many lines of view. And so is that 1 meter, what's the most challenging part of realizing that 1 meter resolution? Is it that two-dimensional sort of integration of many lines of sight with the data, or is it the time of flight of the single beam? Where do the challenges lie?
There are a few challenges across this, but we can, obviously that is a trade study. We need to do a trade-off study between how expensive the operation would be of the system. So we can get more points and more frequently, but obviously that will take require more visits to the field, to the orchard, and more regular monitoring. We could also consider putting multiple base stations, like LiDAR receiver in this case, across the field. They cost currently a couple of $1,000. Potentially we can reduce that to much lower, much less if we, again, thanks to the fine tuning we're doing.
So a question here, where are you in the product development sort of roadmap for this? Because really you're starting with the concept, you've got off the shelf products, you know, you have a drone, you've got the form factor of the sensor. So at what stage are you in that whole product development roadmap, and when do you see sort of field scale trials being implemented?
Well, yeah, original hope was to get to TRL 5 or 6 throughout this project. We are probably still on quite on track on that if everything goes well. So I think we are currently at TRL 4, between 3 and 4, honestly. So we have already a prototype that can be brought to the field, and that's the most important thing, because once we start collecting data, I expect that we will also have a new eureka moment there. So not just the one we already had about the use of photosynthesis, but in fact, the potential for having a more efficient processing of data that yields immediately what we want. But this will require training, as most machine learning algorithms require.
Cool. And well done. You've managed to flush Mick Schaefer out from behind the cloud of anonymous user. A question from Mick for you. What's the maximum range that you think the system could measure, over which the system could measure CO2 concentration? I presume it means a range from the transmitter to the receiver, but Mick, correct me if I'm wrong. So what's the range? Yes, no, the maximum range is limited by the attitude, so the orientation precision of the gimbal. So if we do not want to go into military grade gimbals which cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, of course we need to limit the range to around 20-40 meters ideally. That will be tested in
in real conditions, because obviously the wind and situations like that can make it a bit more difficult in reality. But we are aiming to have a couple of like 20-30 meters range ideally. So that will allow to make a single monitoring on the entire orchard with a single base station smartly located, let's say.
Okay, and am I right in, so the transmitter is omnidirectional, right? And so the drone attitude isn't critical in terms of presenting the signal to the receiver, or is it?
It is critical, but the gimbal decouples it to a certain extent. So obviously, as long as there is an active control system that orients the laser, which is now commercial technology, it's no longer military. This was done decades ago for military applications, and now it's possible to. We know that cinematography has brought high stability cameras to drones. It's the same technology that is commercially available.
Okay, Alex, you've generated a lot of interest, and it's almost acid hour, but there's a couple more for you. So tell us about the data. Like what sort of data is involved in doing a survey around, for example, one receiver, and what's the tactic that you're thinking of in terms of dealing at a commercial scale?
So again, I think the biggest challenge is the optimal trade-off between how frequent are the point measurements and their exploitation. So making sense of data again in a spatial temporal kind of trends is our key objective. To do so, of course, a higher spatial and temporal resolution would be beneficial, but up to a certain point, because then the complexity of the data processing might become daunting. The fine-tuning of the commercial solution will probably focus largely on that. To be honest, the point measurements are very accurate. This technique is accurate to detect the molecular concentrations. Potentially is also adequate to detect the aerosol concentrations, and we know that there are some like dust and particles in the fields that could be of interest. Spore, for instance. We were in discussion with strawberry farmers years ago about the importance of detecting spores from mildew and other diseases. That could be also possible, but definitely the system is designed around the molecular absorption. So CO2 at the moment, next we will look also at other molecules associated with the fruit ripening.
And is a particular target orchards, the fact that you're involved in the Summerfruits project by design insofar as the amount of CO2 that's available over the orchards, or do you consider this a potentially challenging one? Are there alternative crops that are either more CO2 or that you feel are really going to challenge the system? What's the relationship between your sensor, your idea, and this particular growing system?
That's a very, very good question, David. Not an easy one to answer. Clearly, every plant has a different photosynthesis yield. We know that some plants are much less green than others, and even the concentration of fruit changes a lot. So we were lucky enough to find literature on the photosynthesis yield of peach trees and of reasonable size, similarly to the cultivars we're targeting. I think we focus for the moment on that, but definitely the system has potential for extension. We were thinking in the past, we were looking at strawberries. We will be looking at other plantations in the future. I think there is also obviously a matter of atmospheric boundary layer. So the taller is the plant, the higher we are flying, so the wind strength could be higher. So of course, we need to look carefully at negating the effect of wind, because wind with its advection removes actually the effects of photosynthesis. So it's kind of wiping out the data we want to measure. So we need to measure most likely in no wind or low wind conditions, and we know that this is also beneficial for the stability of the drone. We know that there are some situations of low wind throughout the day, so that's the advantage. So.
Awesome, which feeds very nicely into a weather-related question I was given. So in terms of other conditions, so humidity, for example, temperature, what are the climatic variables that you've got to keep a close eye on in addition to wind in an orchard scenario?
Look, many have an effect. We know, and unfortunately, we do not know 100% the implication. For instance, humidity, probably we should look at it further. We know for sure that wind is the overwhelming, like the the predominant effect in a certain sense. The presence, we need to know the baseline CO2 in the, but that is measured intrinsically by the system, because photosynthesis is relative to the baseline, so to the CO2 already present in the environment. So I think that will be, our research will first focus on those two effects, and then we will extend that humidity and perhaps pressure and also atmospheric density and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Alex, I think it's the last one that we've got. So who do you see going to be the users of this sort of class of technology? Do you see a service provision model, or do you ultimately see this in the hands of the growers themselves?
Look, it's the system is probably going to be inexpensive and small enough that potentially individual growers eventually could consider buying it. But medium, small growers, again, we may consider having a subscription service where with a single drone and a single remote pilot, perhaps we can cover a large area and multiple growers throughout the season. So I don't think there is really a value in individual growers buying their own system, but we ultimately need to come up with the final figures for telling the answer to that. I think large growers could consider buying their own system if that is and potentially integrated with other sensors. So I think when going down the line of technological maturity, we will identify the best, the most economically viable solution in terms of combination of sensors, so multiple sensors on the same platform that is sold to a reasonable price correlated to the income of the single grower.
Okay, now you've got to give it up now. We've spoken about eureka moments. Tell me about the gnarly moments. What do you, and right at the coal face of this research technical challenge, what are you experiencing gnarly wise, and how have you dealt with it?
I think we are still to face one, but we are prepared. So that's my best answer. No, yeah, thanks to the fact that we are capitalizing on whatever is available already in the literature and on previous developments on this technology. So we had some research on this. So, and on our campus facilities, RMIT has amazing campus facilities and laboratories. So Tom, Islam, and myself are now going around the campuses and making use of all the possible fancy facilities, so to mitigate. So I think we are going to face some now going forward, but we will be highly prepared.
Okay, so I take that to say that you think you're on top of the physics challenges, chemistry possibly, and biology. Well, let's just see what nature throws at you. So
yeah, we limit, obviously our expertise in that area is limited, but we collaborate with people which have a fantastic understanding of what we are measuring. So definitely we are complementing a little bit the team in this. Yeah.
Excellent. And Alex, I guess last one, we've got a minute left. I say, what advice would you share to our family of researchers here in terms of the approach when it comes to working with the industry side, the commercial side? Summerfruit's been a great supporter of the project. Any advice or comments? Yeah,
by all means, to follow a bit our steps in the sense of not looking just to more mature technologies, but also invest some of your efforts into low maturity technologies, which could hide and like jewels that could potentially lead to major breakthroughs in the future. So definitely there is high value in investing in mature technology because it leads more quickly to products, but not overlook new and emerging concepts, definitely.
And it's worth adding that this project, this element of this project is probably the farthest reaching one in terms of that technical maturity, in terms of, very, very low. It's blue sky, but it's ambitious, but it's profound. And it's great to see that Summerfruit Australia and Agility Research Ian's team are really backing it as well, in addition to the high TRL sensors that have been deployed that we heard earlier. So on behalf of us all, Alex, thank you and the wider project team for a really informative presentation.
Thank you, and we are very thankful to the CRC for supporting this. Thank you very much, David.